Hi, so in this short tutorial, I just want to show how to take a video from that was made to do photogrammetry and use Sketchfab to export a really low resolution model and then upload it to the web. So this is my base video. It's a detail I took of kind of how kind of space under construction, and it's just showing this electricity plug, some cables, and some foam, some very irregular geometries. As you see, the video is very short. It's less than 2 minutes. And, you can take videos up to 10 minutes, but I'm using this one because it's on the shorter side and therefore should be faster to process. So all you need to do is take your video, and this was just taken with a phone camera, and drag and drop it into reality capture. And it would actually, let me do this again. So one setting that you can set before you hit OK is here the jump length. So the default is 1, which is pretty good for most users, especially if you didn't move too fast with your camera. I would start with that, and then if you realize that there's not enough overlap between images, you can adjust it to a higher value, lower value if there's not enough overlap, or if you feel like you're having too many images and you're tons of overlap and they're almost all the same, then you can increase the jump length to a higher value. So let me just pause the video and meet you when this is done processing. All right, this is how it looks like when it's done processing. Here you see there's quite a lot of overlap between the images, so this looks pretty good. So I'm just going ahead to align images, and that will basically calculate the overlap between the different images. This is what the result looks like. You can now go, and you already see that it's kind of rotated in space. So we can change the ground plane for it to be more flat, but it's actually probably easier once we have the mesh generator, but might be a good sort of step to do now before we do a lot more calculating. All right, so now, just like always, you just go down the stack here, you start with a line, and then you go hit the calculate button, calculate model button, and it should give us a result in a few minutes. All right, we got this. Doesn't look too promising, but it's actually just turned upside down. So we can go into reconstructions at ground plane, actually flip the whole thing around for it to look up. Yeah, that looks pretty close. I mean, again, we'll crop the whole thing afterwards. Although, actually, we can actually crop it a little bit. Here, set reconstruction plane. Yeah, that looks pretty good already. So the important step we want to do now is to actually reduce the polygon count down because we want to be uploading it to the web. So now it's way too heavy. So I'm going to hit the simplify button, and right now it's probably like 1 million polygons or something, way too much to upload. So just go to 40,000 or something like that, and usually this step doesn't take too long. Here we go. Now we can hit the texture button and see, how that model is. And despite it being low resolution, the texture is really what adds the detail. So that's really the trick for anything you upload to the web, is actually optimize the geometry down as much as possible. So 40,000 polygons is good if you don't have any other objects in the scene. If you have other objects in the scene, you actually want to go down even further, and you'll be surprised how low you can go. I mean, you can have, there's entire worlds that have been built with like 10,000 polygons. Obviously, you want to be really mindful of the textures and have good textures to work with. But generally, the people tend to actually want to have, because they think they want to have more detail, they export with too high resolutions, and then basically just makes everything harder down the line. It takes longer to upload, it takes longer to load when somebody is actually accessing the content from a website. So it really just becomes frustrating on all ends. So that's a really important step for you to kind of estimate how much you can optimize your scene. And that is really a kind of slightly different concern from, when we're just creating things for Rhino or for desktop drawing. Okay, so, and here you see the difference, right? So when you go into scene, you can switch between solid state, where this just looks very rough, and not something really, not like anything really, and then you add the texture, and suddenly you have so much detail, even with like a very low poly count. All right, I'm just going to crop the edges away, and then I'm going to upload this. So when you go to reconstruction, here, so set reconstruction region, and really make it the size of that plane that we have here, or something like that. And I can basically trim away the other parts that are not as clean. So it's actually, it looks pretty straight. So now I can go on to box selection and say select triangles outside of the box, and then filter selection. And so I'll just delete everything that's outside of it. As you see, it's kind of not very smooth. It doesn't create a sharp cut. It just creates sort of a jagged edge. So maybe you want to leave, slightly bigger area if you want to. Yeah, actually, let's do that. Let's leave like slightly more frame around it. So box, deselect, set reconstruction region kind of resets it to the current coordinates, something like that. So again, we go to box, selection here, select triangles outside of box, and then filter the selection. All right, this is pretty good. So now you just can go on to scene, workflow, and then model, and then you can export your mesh of an OBJ. So I'll just export it here as an OBJ, and I actually know my password here. I think. Of course not. So that is something you have to remember your password ideally to do that. All right, I'll figure that one out and meet you here in a second. All right, I remembered my password and uploaded it, exported it here. So I'll just show you again. You just export it as an OBJ. You can also export it straight as a GLB file, and that will allow you to upload it straight to Mozilla hubs without actually going through a Rhino. So let's do that tool. Okay. All right. So next step, I'm going to open up Rhino and just trim off some of these edges, and then that file will be ready to export it, to Sketchfab and Mozilla hubs. All right, so here we are in Rhino. Here's the file that I exported, and you can notice that it actually produced 3 separate files. So an OBJ, an MTL, and a PNG. The OBJ holds the geometry information. The MTL is kind of like a help file that helps to map the image file onto the geometry, and then here we have the image file. So those are always really cool looking files that basically map all the textures that are on your object onto a square image. So to import that into Rhino, we just drag the OBJ into Rhino and say open file and just accept everything. And then if you go into shaded view, you should be able to see, actually maybe even rendered, you see the result of this scan. And even though it's a really low resolution, very small file, it actually looks pretty good. So here, it's always good to check the file size. So there are only 4 megabytes. That's a really tiny file. And all I'll be doing in Rhino is actually just cut these kind of rough edges away, trim it. So you can see here, I'm using kind of clipping plane to preview it. Yeah, something like that. But actually, I'll just basically build a box around it and trim the edges away. So this is now a mesh within Rhino, and Rhino natively works with nerves. So this is a really important distinction, and there's a whole video about that in on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, so you can check that out if you want to know more. And I do recommend watching that because it's really, I feel like, essential knowledge that a lot of architects don't have. But for right now, the important thing to know is that this is a mesh, and when you click on it, you see the mesh resolution, and then here's a NURBS. But we can split the mesh with a NURBS object by clicking mesh split and then selecting it, and then it will basically separate the outer edge from the inner edge, and we only get that kind of nice clean shell. So the next thing we want to check before we export to Mozilla Hubs is scale. So Mozilla Hubs works with meters. So I want to show the units here on the meters. There are millimeters, just change it to meters right now. It doesn't really matter because reality capture doesn't actually export things in scale. So you need to scale it up to the right scale anyway. So I'm going to make this slightly surreal scene where we can walk around on this object. So I'll just actually create a kind of scaly for myself, a real person. That's 1.7 meters. This is my height. I always like to use my own height as a reference because I know how that feels. So this would be, a person. You can sort of start imagining how it would be to walk around on this moonscape. That seems actually like a pretty good scale for us. Let's just stick with it. Obviously, when you do your project, you want more nuance. So here we are. Moved it to 0, 0, 0, just to kind of, it's always good practice when you're working in 3D tool for your model to not be floating around somewhere in space. So now we have our cleaned model, and I'm going to export it again as an OBJ, and I'll make a new folder just to make sure. So Blender, and here OBJ for Blender. So we need to export this now for Blender, and the reason is that unfortunately there's no direct export from Rhino to create a GLTF, and Blender is the fastest way to just import something and make, turn it into a file format that Mozilla Hubs will understand. But that file that we have created now, the OBJ file with the mesh upload, actually is already readable by Sketchfab. So, oh, this is my seminar. So let's just open up Sketchfab here real quick and show you that. So Sketchfab will read OBJs automatically. So here, if you can drag all three at the same time, upload them, and oh, it's too large. Huh. So that is most likely okay. So that's a really interesting moment. So that is because actually the image file is so big. So in this case, we want to make sure that our image file is a little bit more optimized because we don't need to be that high resolution. By default, when it comes out of reality capture, it's over 8,000 pixels big, which is really large for an image. So I'm going to open that up in Photoshop and just downsample the image a little bit. And this is going to be actually useful for our Blender upload as well. So I'm going to just make it into 4, let's say 4,000 by 4,000. Yeah, I think it's like 486. Okay. So that should make that file a lot smaller. And I'll actually just save over it because we have the bigger file saved in the other file, in the other folder anyway. And that way you don't get any confusions, because you don't want to change the name because it will actually might affect the way that that file is using. Okay, so although I think it might have written the wrong file on the because we want to override the PNG, not the oh no, it's just still working. Yeah, PNGs sometimes take a long time to save. JPEGs are a lot faster. Still working on there. All right, so here now we have only 20 megabyte for the image file, which is a lot better. So let's try that again. Between these 3 files, upload them to Sketchfab. And now it's going really smoothly. And yeah, well, this is uploading. I'll just show you how to export these files for Blender from hubs. So here I have Blender open, file, import, OBJ. I'm going to find my folder for Blender, import the OBJ. And here's the object. It doesn't show the texture, and that's okay. So don't worry about it. The texture is still there. All you need to do is select the object, say export, and then here, export it as a GLTF. And here in desktop, home bundle for Blender, and then here for hubs, export GLTF. If you have animations and stuff like that, you know, you would select these options here, but in this case, it's just a simple geometry. So let's see. Okay, this is still uploading. It always takes a second. So it's uploaded, but it's still processing. So we can just go to Sketchfab here. And again, drag and drop our file. So in this case, the GLB into Sketchfab. And should go pretty quickly. So basically, as you see, the GLB file is only one file, and it actually packages the image file into the same file. So, you know, what were 3 little files before is now all in one file. So you don't need to upload separate textures. It's all together. And it's kind of a very common web format, so something that I think most architects are not familiar with GLB maybe. So here now I have 2 websites open. Everything's uploading. And in a few seconds, you should see the result of both of these here. All right, actually, Hubs was faster. So here's our model, and something that happens when you upload really large models, it actually automatically scales the model to 0.1%. So that's why it looks so tiny, even though it was really big in Rhino. So you can just here scale it to 1 instead of 0.1. And so now we have the full model. And I'm not going to go too much into Mozilla Hubs. I'm just going to add a spawn point so we arrive on the scene somewhere on the platform. And yeah, here you have your kind of basic landscape. Now you just need to say published to hubs, and you'll have a 3D scanned environment that you can walk around in. And this is uploading. Yeah, so it's giving you this window. So it still thinks that our texture is too large. So that's just something to think about. You can maybe optimize it even further. So often, even now that I've done it a lot, it takes a few tests to get the right resolution for things. And Sketchfab is being really slow in the meantime, still processing. I have noticed that this 3D elves line here is there for good reason, because for some reason they often take a long time to process, but the results are worth it, and it often looks really, really good. All right, so this has done uploading. I just went on to view your scene and then created a room with my scene. So now I can enter my room, enter on screen. If you have a VR headset, you can actually walk around it in VR. I think it's going a little bit slow because I think there's a lot going on my computer, but you get the idea. So now you can actually walk around in that space. So here we are. We can press the G button to float around. I mean, obviously the scene requires some more refinement, but just as a basic workflow, I think it shows pretty well how you can, very quickly go from a video to an actual 3D model that you can walk around it. You can invite friends into it. It's social, so this is social web VR. There's more tutorials on that, but yeah, here it is. And our Sketchfab model has uploaded as well, finally. So it has a little bit better lighting by default, but those are all detailed settings. You can also adjust. You can see how the exact same model looks slightly different here. But yeah, we'll get into that stuff in some other talk. Thank you.